I remember the moment everything shattered. The moment I found out my wife, Sarah, had been unfaithful. It was an ordinary Thursday evening, the kind of night where the world outside felt distant and the mundane comforts of home wrapped around me like a warm blanket. I had just returned from work, a long day of meetings and deadlines, and all I wanted was to see her smile. But when I opened the door, something was off. The air felt heavy, charged with an unspoken tension. I walked in, calling out her name, but there was no response. The house was eerily quiet. I stepped into the living room, and that's when I saw it, the half-open drawer of our shared desk, a place where we kept our lives organized. It was an innocuous sight, but my heart raced as I approached it, drawn by an instinct I didn't yet understand. Inside, I found a small, folded piece of paper, and as I pulled it out, my breath caught in my throat. It was a note, hastily written in a scrawl that I recognized all too well. My hands trembled as I read the words, "I'll see you again tonight, my hypnotist." The implication hit me like a punch to the gut. Hypnotist. My mind raced, replaying every interaction, every moment of intimacy between Sarah and me, and it all felt like a cruel joke. How could she do this? How could she betray me with someone who wielded the power of the mind, someone who could twist reality and manipulate emotions? Shock settled into disbelief. I thought of the life we had built together, the laughter, the dreams, the quiet nights spent wrapped in each other's arms. All of it crumbled before me, and a suffocating anger began to rise. I felt trapped between the need to confront her and the fear of what I might discover. What was I supposed to do? I wanted to scream, to tear apart the fabric of our life, and yet I stood frozen, the note clutched tightly in my fist. Minutes passed, or maybe hours. I couldn't tell. The walls seemed to close in around me, and the shadows in the corners of the room grew darker, more sinister. I thought of the hypnotist. What kind of man would seduce a woman with such a gift? Was he charming? Was he handsome? The jealousy burned, hot in my chest, mingling with the bitterness of betrayal. I wanted to know every detail, to understand how she could choose him over me. Finally, I heard the door creak open. Sarah stepped inside, her expression shifting from surprise to confusion as she noticed my rigid stance. The moment our eyes locked, I knew she sensed something was wrong. I could see the gears turning in her mind, the realization dawning that I had discovered her secret. "What's wrong?" she asked, her voice laced with feigned innocence. I held up the note, my heart pounding as I spoke. "What's this, Sarah? Who is the hypnotist?" Her face paled, and for a fleeting moment I saw the mask slip. The shock mirrored my own, but it was quickly replaced with a defensive posture. "It's not what you think," she stammered, but the words felt hollow. "Not what I think," I echoed, my voice rising. "You're sleeping with a hypnotist. How could you do this to us?" The confrontation spiraled into chaos. She tried to explain, to justify her actions, but all I could hear was the sound of my heart breaking. The betrayal was palpable, an aching void that threatened to consume me. I felt like a fool for trusting her, for believing in the sanctity of our marriage. As she spoke, I barely registered her words, lost in a whirlwind of emotions, anger, despair, and a deep, gnawing sense of loss. I had never felt so powerless. It was as if the ground had been pulled out from under me and I was left hanging in the abyss, waiting for the inevitable crash. That night I didn't sleep. Instead, I sat in the dark, replaying the moment over and over in my mind, each iteration sharpening the pain. I had been betrayed in the most intimate way, and I could feel the weight of that betrayal wrapping around me like a shroud. I knew I had to confront this head-on, but how? What would I do next? The thought of revenge slithered into my mind, a dark whisper that promised a way to reclaim my dignity. But how could I make him pay for the damage he had done? Looking back, I realized there were signs, small cracks in the facade of our marriage that I had chosen to ignore. Sarah and I had been together for nearly 8 years, and like any couple, we had our ups and downs. In the beginning, everything felt perfect. We were young and in love, two souls entwined in a world that felt like it belonged only to us. We shared secrets, dreams, and a bond that I thought was unbreakable. But as time went on, life began to wear on us. The thrill of new love faded, and we settled into a comfortable routine. I worked long hours at my job, trying to climb the corporate ladder while Sarah pursued her passion for art. She was talented, creating beautiful pieces that often left me in awe. But as her career flourished, I could see her growing more distant. She became consumed by her art, spending late nights at the studio, surrounded by a new group of friends. I supported her, of course, believing it was just a phase, a necessary sacrifice for her success. Yet there were moments when I felt the shift. The late-night phone calls, the whispers of laughter that trickled into the early hours of the morning. I brushed it off as paranoia, convinced that my insecurities were playing tricks on me. After all, Sarah had always been the life of the party, charming and magnetic. I was proud of her, but I also felt a gnawing sense of inadequacy creeping in. Maybe I had become complacent, a shadow of the man she had fallen in love with. Then came the stories about the hypnotist. It started innocently enough. She mentioned him in passing, a fellow artist who was also a hypnotist and claimed to help people unlock their creativity. I remember smiling, thinking that it was a quirky but harmless interest. But as the weeks went by, I noticed how often her conversations drifted back to him. She spoke of his talent, his charm, and how he had opened her eyes to new possibilities. I wanted to believe it was all professional, that her admiration was merely a reflection of her artistic aspirations. But deep down, I felt something shift. Their late-night sessions became more frequent, and I could sense a change in her demeanor. She seemed more vibrant, more alive, and yet I felt more like a ghost in my own home. I would come home to find her lost in thought, her mind elsewhere, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was losing her. In retrospect, I realize how naive I was to ignore my instincts. The signs were there, like breadcrumbs leading me down a dark path, but I had been too blinded by love and trust to see them. I wanted to believe that our bond was unbreakable, that nothing could come between us. Yet here I was, standing at the precipice of my worst fears, grappling with the reality of betrayal. The night after the confrontation, I sat in our living room, surrounded by the remnants of our life together. The photographs on the walls, the laughter that echoed in the corners, everything felt tainted now. I couldn't help but think of the moments we had shared, the plans we had made. I had envisioned a future filled with love and companionship, but now it felt like a cruel joke. I thought about how Sarah had always been drawn to the mysterious and the unconventional. She had a fascination with the unknown, the things that lurked just beyond the veil of reality. I had always admired that about her, but now it felt like a double-edged sword. Was it that same curiosity that had led her into the arms of a man who could manipulate her mind? The hypnotist, his name echoed in my mind like a haunting melody. I needed to know more about him. Who was he? How had he managed to weave his way into my wife's heart and mind? I felt an insatiable urge to uncover every detail, to understand the depths of their connection. I had to learn about the man who had stolen my wife, the man who had turned our love into a battlefield. As the sun began to rise, casting a pale light across the room, I made a decision. I wouldn't just sit back and let this slide. I would confront this head-on. I would find that hypnotist, and I would make sure he understood the weight of his actions. The thought of revenge began to simmer in my mind, a dark and intoxicating brew that promised a sense of agency in a situation where I felt utterly powerless. I needed to reclaim my dignity, to ensure that the hypnotist would never forget the mistake he had made. I would not be a victim. I would become the architect of my own fate. The air felt electric as I stood in front of Sarah, the note still clutched tightly in my hand. I could see the fight-or-flight response flickering in her eyes, a mix of fear and defiance. I had never felt so certain about anything in my life as I did in that moment. I wanted answers, and I wanted the truth. "What were you thinking?" I demanded, my voice a low growl. "How could you do this to me, to us?" She opened her mouth to speak, but the words faltered, caught in the web of her guilt. "It's not what you think," she finally managed, her voice trembling. Not what I think." I interrupted, the anger bubbling to the surface. "You've been sleeping with a hypnotist, Sarah. You think that's just some innocent little dalliance. You've betrayed me." Tears welled in her eyes, and I felt a pang of regret for the pain I was inflicting. But it was too late for empathy. The betrayal was fresh, a wound that refused to heal even as I stood before her, raw and exposed. "I didn't mean for it to happen," she cried, desperation lacing her words. It was just supposed to be a way to help me with my art. Help you, I scoffed, incredulous. You think having an affair with him is helping you? You think that's how you deal with your struggles, by sleeping with him? She shook her head, her voice barely a whisper. I didn't plan for this to happen, it just did. He helped me see things differently and I got lost in it. I thought I could control it, but I couldn't. In that moment, I realized how deep the manipulation ran. The hypnotist had not only seduced her physically, but had also ensnared her mind. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me, the realization that I was fighting an enemy I couldn't even see. So, he put you under his spell, and that's your excuse for betraying me. I pressed, unable to hide my disdain. I didn't want to hurt you, she pleaded, her voice cracking. I love you, I thought I could keep it separate, but it spiraled out of control. I didn't know how to stop it. Love. I echoed, the bitterness in my voice palpable. If you loved me, you wouldn't have done this. You wouldn't have let him into our lives. The tension in the room escalated, thick enough to cut with a knife. I could see the walls of our home, once a sanctuary, now closing in around us, suffocating me. I wanted to scream, to throw something, to make her feel the chaos that was now my life. But beneath the anger there was a flicker of heartbreak. I had loved Sarah deeply, and the thought of her with someone else, especially a man who could twist her mind, was unbearable. What did he do to you? I demanded. What did you let him do? She looked away, shame washing over her face. He helped me explore parts of myself I didn't know existed. It felt exhilarating, but I lost sight of what was real. I thought I could go back, but I was too far gone. The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. I felt my heart shatter further, each fragment piercing through me like shards of glass. You let him take you, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. You let him take everything we built together. I know, she admitted, her voice breaking. I'm so sorry, I never wanted to hurt you. I thought I could keep it a secret, but it's all fallen apart now. How do I know you're not still under his spell? I asked, the question slipping out before I could stop it. How can I trust you again? Sarah's face crumpled, the weight of my words crashing down on her. I'll do whatever it takes to prove to you that I'm yours. I want to fix this. I want us back. The desperation in her voice almost broke me, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was losing a part of myself in this confrontation. The woman I loved was still there, but she was tainted by the choices she had made. I could see the flicker of the woman I had married, but the shadows of her betrayal loomed large. I need time, I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. I can't just forgive and forget. You've broken something that can't be easily repaired. The tears streamed down her cheeks and I felt a pang of sympathy. But the betrayal was still fresh, and the anger was a fire that refused to die. I turned away, unable to look at her any longer. I needed to process this, to figure out what I wanted. As I left the room, I realized this confrontation was just the beginning. I felt a deep, unsettling urge rising within me, a need for revenge against the hypnotist who had taken advantage of my wife's vulnerability. I wanted him to feel the pain I felt, to understand the chaos he had unleashed. This was far from over. I would ensure that he never forgot the mistake he had made. In the days that followed the confrontation with Sarah, I found myself in a haze of anger and despair. The house felt foreign, as if the walls were closing in on me, suffocating me with memories that had turned bitter. I had spent so many nights tossing and turning, unable to escape the images of Sarah with him, the hypnotist. The thought of their encounters gnawed at me, a relentless itch I couldn't scratch. But amidst the turmoil, a new clarity emerged. I realized I needed to take control of my life, to reclaim the power that had been stripped away from me. The idea of revenge began to crystallize in my mind, a dark and intoxicating plan that promised to alleviate the pain of betrayal. I wanted the hypnotist to know the consequences of his actions, to feel the weight of my grief and anger. I started with research, digging into the world of hypnosis and the man who had infiltrated my life. His name was Marcus, and he was a well-known figure in the local art scene. A quick online search revealed a polished image, charismatic, charming, and utterly confident. He had a website filled with testimonials from satisfied clients, all praising his transformative abilities. But beneath the surface, I sensed a darker truth. I learned that he often performed at galleries and events, showcasing his talent for entertainment and healing. The more I discovered, the more I felt the fire of revenge igniting within me. I began to sketch out a plan, one that would ensure Marcus understood the ramifications of his actions. The first step was to attend one of his events. I needed to see him in action, to understand the allure that had drawn Sarah in. I found out he was scheduled to perform at a local gallery that weekend. The thought of being in the same space as him sent a shiver down my spine, but I knew it was necessary. I had to face him, to see the man who had taken my wife from me. As the day approached, I felt a mix of trepidation and anticipation. I envisioned myself standing in the crowd, watching him work his magic. I imagined the way he would speak, the way he would hold his audience captive with his words. But as the time drew near, I also felt the simmering rage bubbling beneath the surface, ready to explode. On the night of the event, I arrived early, positioning myself near the front. The gallery was filled with art, vibrant colors and bold strokes that seemed to mock my pain. I watched as people mingled, laughter and chatter filling the air. But my focus was solely on the stage, where Marcus would soon perform. When he finally stepped up, I felt a rush of emotions, anger, jealousy, and a strange sense of helplessness. He was everything I had imagined, confident, charming, and utterly captivating. He commanded the room with ease, his voice smooth and melodic, drawing people in as if they were moths to a flame. I watched as he effortlessly hypnotized a volunteer from the audience, guiding them into a trance with his soothing words. In that moment, I understood how he had ensnared Sarah. He had a power over people, a way of making them feel seen and understood. But that realization only fueled my anger further. I was determined to show him that every action has consequences. As the night wore on, I began to formulate my plan. I would expose Marcus for what he truly was, a predator hiding behind the guise of a healer. I thought about how I could turn the tables on him, to make him feel vulnerable and humiliated. My mind raced with ideas, each more daring than the last. I decided to gather evidence of his manipulative tactics. I would talk to people who had been hypnotized by him, uncovering their stories and experiences. I wanted to build a case against him, to show that he was not the benevolent figure he pretended to be. I envisioned a public confrontation, a moment where I could lay bare his deceit and watch as the crowd turned against him. But I also wanted to make it personal. I thought about ways to make him feel the pain he had caused me. I would invade his world, disrupt his carefully curated image, and ensure that he knew he had crossed a line he could never uncross. As the night came to a close, I left the gallery, my heart racing with adrenaline. The first step of my plan was complete, and I felt a sense of purpose that had eluded me since the discovery of Sarah's infidelity. I was no longer a victim. I was a man on a mission, and nothing would stand in my way. With each passing day, I would gather more information, piece together the puzzle of Marcus's life, and prepare for the moment I would confront him. I felt a dark thrill at the thought of it. Revenge was no longer just a fleeting thought. It was becoming my reality. I was ready to ensure that the hypnotist never forgot the mistake he had made. The days turned into a blur of planning and anticipation as I gathered my evidence against Marcus. I reached out to people who had been hypnotized by him, some of whom were eager to share their experiences, while others were reluctant but eventually opened up. Their stories painted a picture of a man who used his talent to manipulate, to control, and to exploit the vulnerabilities of those who sought his help. I documented everything, piecing together a narrative that would expose Marcus for who he truly was. I could feel the weight of my plan growing heavier, but it also fueled my determination. I was no longer just a man wronged. I was a force to be reckoned with. The night of the public confrontation was fast approaching, and I was both exhilarated and terrified. I had arranged to confront Marcus during another one of his performances, this time at a larger venue, an upscale art gallery that was known for attracting influential patrons and media attention. This would be my stage, and I was determined to make it unforgettable. As I arrived at the gallery, I felt a rush of adrenaline coursing through my veins. The atmosphere was electric, with patrons mingling and sipping expensive wine, their laughter echoing against the walls adorned with stunning artwork. I could see Marcus across the room, charming a group of admirers. With his charismatic smile, he looked every bit the part of the talented hypnotist, and I felt a surge of rage at the sight of him. I took a deep breath, reminding myself of why I was there. This was not just about revenge. It was about reclaiming my dignity, about ensuring that he understood the depth of his betrayal. I had gathered my evidence, and I was ready to confront him in front of an audience that would bear witness to his true nature. As the performance began, I positioned myself near the front, my heart pounding in my chest. Marcus took the stage and the crowd fell silent, captivated by his presence. He began to work his magic, hypnotizing volunteers and guiding them through mesmerizing experiences. I watched, seething inside as he wove his spell over the audience, his voice smooth and persuasive. But I was not going to let him escape unscathed. When he finally invited volunteers to participate, I seized my chance. I raised my hand, stepping forward with a confidence I didn't feel. "I'd like to volunteer," I declared, my voice steady even as my heart raced. The crowd turned to look at me, and I could see the surprise on Marcus's face as he acknowledged me. "Ah, we have a brave soul here," he said, his smile charming but laced with thinly veiled confusion. "What's your name?" "James," I replied, locking eyes with him, "and I have a few questions for you." The audience murmured, intrigued by the unexpected turn of events. I could feel the tension building as I stepped onto the stage, and I knew I had their full attention. "Let's see what we can do with James," Marcus said, attempting to regain control of the situation. He began his hypnotic routine, his voice smooth and rhythmic, but I was prepared. I had no intention of falling under his spell. As he guided me through the process, I interrupted him, my voice cutting through his soothing tones. "What do you do to your clients, Marcus? Do you help them, or do you manipulate them for your own gain?" The audience gasped, and I could see Marcus's expression shift from surprise to irritation. "This is all part of the experience, James. Just relax," he said, trying to regain control. But I pressed on, my heart racing with exhilaration. "You think you can just hypnotize people into submission? You think you can take advantage of their vulnerabilities without consequences?" The crowd began to murmur, and I could see people shifting uncomfortably in their seats. I had their attention, and I was determined to make my point. "You've hurt people, Marcus. You've taken advantage of those who trust you, and I'm here to expose you for who you really are." Marcus's facade began to crack, and I could see the anger simmering beneath his calm exterior. "This is uncalled for, James. You're ruining the experience for everyone," he shot back, but I could hear the uncertainty in his voice. I continued, my voice rising above the din. "You think you can charm your way out of this? You think you can hypnotize your way out of accountability?" With that, I pulled out my phone, revealing the documentation I had gathered, testimonials, messages, and evidence of his manipulative tactics. "Look at this," I said, holding it up for the audience to see. "This is the real Marcus, a man who exploits the vulnerable for his own gain, a man who has no regard for the lives he ruins." Gasps filled the room as people began to lean in, curious and shocked. I felt a rush of power surging through me, the satisfaction of finally confronting the man who had shattered my life. Marcus's composure faltered, and I saw the anger flash in his eyes. "You're making a mistake, James," he warned, but I could see the fear creeping in as well. "I'm not afraid of you anymore," I replied, my voice steady. "You've taken enough from me. It's time for you to face the consequences of your actions." As I spoke, I could feel the crowd shifting, their loyalty turning from him to me. The atmosphere in the gallery had changed, and I knew I had turned the tide. As I stepped back, leaving Marcus standing there, exposed and vulnerable, I felt a sense of closure wash over me. I had taken my power back, and I knew that this moment would haunt him forever. The crowd erupted into applause, and I felt the weight of my pain begin to lift. I had confronted the man who had wronged me, and I had ensured that he would never forget the mistake he had made. As I left the stage, I looked back at Marcus one last time. His confident facade had crumbled, and I could see the anger and humiliation etched on his face. I smiled, knowing that I had finally found the closure I had been searching for. The aftermath of that night was a whirlwind. As I stepped off the stage, the adrenaline still coursing through my veins, I felt a mix of triumph and exhaustion. The applause echoed in my ears, a cacophony of validation that drowned out the pain of betrayal. I had exposed Marcus, the hypnotist who had taken my wife from me, and in doing so, I had reclaimed a part of myself that I thought was lost forever. But as I walked through the gallery, the faces of the people who had witnessed my confrontation began to blur. I felt a strange emptiness settling in, a realization that revenge, while satisfying, had not healed the wounds inflicted by Sarah's betrayal. The cheers of the crowd faded, replaced by the haunting memories of my marriage, of laughter, intimacy, and love that had turned sour. In the days that followed, I was inundated with messages from those who had seen the performance. Some praised my bravery, while others expressed concern for my well-being. I even received messages from people who had been manipulated by Marcus, sharing their own stories of pain and exploitation. It was both comforting and unsettling to know that my fight had resonated with others, but it also deepened the ache in my heart. I had wanted to ensure that Marcus would never forget his mistake, but as I reflected on my actions, I began to question whether the revenge I sought was worth the price I had paid. I had exposed him, yes, but in doing so, I had also shone a light on the fragility of my own heart. The anger that had fueled me now felt like a double-edged sword, cutting through the remnants of my relationship with Sarah. When I finally sat down to talk with her again, it was under a cloud of uncertainty. She had reached out, desperate to understand what had happened and to express her remorse. I could see the pain in her eyes, the regret that lingered in the silence between us. But the trust that had once defined our relationship was shattered, and I didn't know if it could ever be rebuilt. "James, I'm so sorry for everything," she said, her voice trembling. "I never wanted to hurt you. I thought I could control it, that I could keep it separate, but I was wrong. It spiraled out of control and I lost myself." Her words hung heavy in the air, and I felt the weight of my own emotions pressing down on me. I had fought for closure, but now I found myself grappling with the reality of forgiveness. "I need time, Sarah," I replied, my voice steady but filled with uncertainty. "I don't know if I can ever trust you again." "I understand," she said, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I'll do whatever it takes to prove to you that I'm still here, that I want us back. Please, just give me a chance." As I looked into her eyes, I realized that this was not just about her betrayal, it was about my own healing. I had fought for my dignity, but in the process, I had also lost sight of what I truly wanted. I had sought revenge against Marcus, but what I really needed was to confront my own feelings of inadequacy and betrayal. In the weeks that followed, I began to find a fragile balance between anger and understanding. I spent time reflecting on my own vulnerabilities, on the ways I had contributed to the distance between Sarah and me. It was a painful process, but it forced me to confront the truth. I had to learn to forgive, not just Sarah, but myself as well. Marcus's reputation took a hit after my public confrontation. His clients began to dwindle, and whispers of his questionable practices spread through the art community. I had succeeded in my quest for revenge, but I also came to understand that true healing could not be found in the downfall of another person. As I moved forward, I found solace in the support of friends and family, those who reminded me of my worth beyond the betrayal. I focused on rebuilding my life, on rediscovering the passions and pursuits that had once defined me. I learned to let go of the anger that had consumed me, recognizing that holding onto it would only weigh me down. In time, I reached out to Sarah again. We began to rebuild our relationship, brick by brick, acknowledging the pain but also the love that still lingered beneath the surface. It was a slow process, filled with difficult conversations and moments of vulnerability, but it was also a journey of rediscovery, a chance to redefine our connection on a stronger foundation. Revenge had brought me a moment of satisfaction, but forgiveness offered me peace. I learned that while betrayal can shatter a relationship, it can also serve as a catalyst for growth and transformation. In the end, I found closure not through vengeance, but through understanding and healing. As I reflect on that tumultuous time, I realize that love is complex. It can be both a source of joy and a catalyst for pain. But in the end, it is the choices we make in the face of adversity that define who we are. I chose to confront my demons, to seek understanding rather than revenge, and in that choice I found a path forward. I may never forget the betrayal, but I have learned to embrace the lessons it taught me. And as I look to the future, I do so with hope, hope for healing, hope for love, and hope for the strength to face whatever comes next. This is my story, one of heartbreak and resilience, and I carry it with me as I continue to navigate the complexities of love and trust. And with that, I close this chapter of my life, ready to embrace whatever comes next.